is now being recorded. This call is now being transcribed.
Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. The topic is the last two stages of the portfolio management, tracking and validation. These two stages are really happening once you've got your you've gone through the prioritization day, your portfolio day. You've got a good idea of what are the projects that you're going to undertake for the rest of the year or over the multi-years, depending on what kind of project it is. So then these two stages make sure that there are other the projects are on track, both on physically and financially, as well as when the projects close out, we're making sure that we have validated the returns that we had promised in the project definition stage. As well as, if there's any lessons learned, we are passing them along, or we're learning from them and moving forward. This is part of management system undertaking that ANI brings. Agenda, I will cover very briefly the need for portfolio management and the 6 stages. We'll recap the 4 stages we've already gone through, and then I will talk about the next 2 in a bit more detail. So let's get started. Portfolio management process, what it is a way to improve project selection according to strategic plan and focusing on integrated results, not only in isolated projects. It's not really about how good a project it is itself, but the process itself is to say, did we give the fair process and we did the comprehensive job of selecting the right project, not just spending a lot of time defining a project. It is a method of ensuring that the best projects are properly resourced, regardless of site, regardless of where they're coming from, type of project. You're trying to put your best resources to the best projects. It is a method to ensure proper business case and risk rating is developed for each project. So everybody is every project is being evaluated with the same criteria, and you're comparing apples to apples. It is a method to improve tracking of work against integrated planning. So this is a process which combines the whole integrated value chain or integrated planning approach together, because you're looking at the bigger picture of each individual project, how it brings a return to the overall integrated operations or integrated value. Those are the 6 stages. Strategy leads into definition, then verification, finally the prioritization. At that point, you have a good idea of what you're about to commit your resources to do the project. So we need to track them, we need to validate them. So let's just do a very quick review of each of these things that I've already covered in the previous webinars. So the people who have attended all 3, the very first webinar was about the strategy and definition. The key things in strategy stage is to make sure you identify the strategic drivers for your business or for your organization. These strategic drivers may be different based on what asset you're in, but the idea is that you've thought through this, and once you've identified the strategic drivers, you identified as well as where you are right now. So what are the gaps? What are the objectives and goals to meet those gaps? And for each of the strategic driver, do we have a metric? Is it a key performance indicator? Is it a thing which is going to be across all different business units, different assets, or is it a high-level KPI? So all that conversation is happening at strategy stage, and really this is a starting point to start identifying projects that are going to meet those strategic goals. This should then lead to your definition stage, where you're now starting to look for the opportunities, or what we call projects, to meet the objectives and the gaps that you just talked about in the first stage. The aim here of this stage is to make sure you standardize everything. So every project should be defined the same way, meaning we're asking the same kind of information, we're asking the same level and quality of information. We're linking them to all the KPIs that we identified in the first stage. We're defining the proper business case, and business case has different elements. We covered them in the first stage, to make sure that when we eventually make it to the prioritization stage, we have all the information to decide what to do with that project. So the next two stages try to do that. So the verification stage comes after the definition has happened. Really, you're checking before you get to the prioritization stage, is the information complete and accurate? Technically and financially, is the project sound? Is it makes sense what the project is saying? Is going to be able to deliver that? And then again, going back to that linking, right? Are we linking properly a project to a strategic KPI? Does that make sense? Does the business case make sense that it's going to be able to help us close the gap in that strategic driver that we had? Once you've gone through that stage, the prioritization is all about making sure that now you're picking the best projects. So in advance of doing the prioritization of portfolio day, you need to come up with a good definition of how you're going to evaluate those projects. What we call lenses is to say, how am I going to compare or score a project? The examples I had shown in my webinar for this stage, the idea was that you pick the type of project. For example, is it a betterment project? Like, are we trying to improve productivities? Are we trying to improve on the bottom line, the value, the money? Or is this like a replacement project where we're trying to replace something which we had, or we're trying to do as is, or a thing which is going to be needed over time because things are aging? Or is it a sustainable development project? Is it a health and safety environment? What kind of project it is should have a different criteria attached to how you can evaluate that project. Some of these projects might be purely on, is it bringing me more money versus what risk is closing? Or some of them might be about purely risk, right? Or some of them might be about which option is going to cost me the least amount and still deliver the best value. So lenses change based on what kind of project it is. So you have to do that work in advance. And then you get to the portfolio day, where you're now starting to compare the similar kind of projects, like betterment to betterment, and just do pure understanding of which are the best project to put your resources towards. What this also helps us do, and for people who have been part of organization, have been part of this process of how the budget is approved, how the projects are approved, you most likely have lived through different cycles of the budget approval. So usually there's a first cut, the second cut, the third cut before the budget finally gets approved. So this process, if you do this properly, allows you to pick the right projects in each cut and not just cut the money across uniformly, which doesn't really help in the execution stage. So once you've gone through that, the end of this is you have a prioritized portfolio. The things we talked about in the last webinar, out of a portfolio day or prioritized portfolio, you will have things which are approved as is, things which might be accelerated, which means that it's such a good project, or it links strategically so well that we want to accelerate the execution of it, so you put more resources to it than what originally planned. It might be decelerated, but it's still a good project, but maybe the strategic alignment is not there as right now, and maybe needs to be delayed a bit. So you may decelerate the execution. And then there are things which are deferred because they just didn't make the cut. They still might be needed later on, so you don't cancel them outright. And finally, there might be things which are canceled. Why I'm going through that right now is because in the next stage, it becomes important. So let's look at the next stage. So in tracking, you've now got your projects approved, and they've been given go ahead to implement or execute. Usually companies will have a process of authorization for funds, which kicks on right after the prioritization. And so what we need to do now, as they're being executed, we need to track these things financially. So every project should be tracked financially, because this is going to become important by the end of this slide. And then high priority projects or high strategic projects should also be tracked physically. The idea being that you track physically to define all the milestones, and then somebody spending the time to look at it, it may not add value for each project, but financially it makes sense, because we still want to know if we need to accelerate or decelerate these projects later on during the execution stage. Financial tracking can be done monthly based on cash forecasts, and projects can then be scored accordingly. So scoring is not, it's important that you have a standardized scoring criteria for the organization, but it's not important how you score them. The idea is, are you on track? And if you're on track, your score should be good. If you're falling behind or you're within a certain band, maybe you're under normal. And depending on how what the company wants to score it, there's eventually will start happening that you're not on track, and then what to do with them. For strategic projects, as we talked about, we should have physical. So what does that mean? We need 3 to 6 milestones, which we can track physically. And now, usually when we're doing this, I get asked is like, what do you mean by milestones? So milestones are usually easy in projects like construction projects, because it's very well defined. You've got pre-construction activities. You need tenders. You need mobilization. You need to get things ready before the construction starts. Then your construction phases will have, again, some milestones like what are we building. So and then when we're commissioning, what are we commissioning? Cold commissioning, hot commissioning. So milestones are easy to define. There are projects which are not construction related, like for example IT implementation, which are also IT guys will have a very good milestone things. In mining world, the problem would happen with the projects which are betterment projects, or they are projects which are investing capital for doing development of the mine, development of the ore body, which is harder to have milestones because you usually do not have mobilization or demob or coal commissioning of these kind of projects. So in that sense, what you want to identify is maybe a drill footage or some kind of a milestone which says how are we progressing based on where we're supposed to be, right? So the difference between financial and physical here in this case has to be financial is all about the cash which was required and how we spent it. The physical has to be disconnected to that. So you may be spending you may be on track of spending the money, but maybe you're not getting the physical progress you were supposed to get. Or you may have things which are being which are on physical track, but you're not spending you're spending too much or not spending enough. And then all those cases, we need to understand why, and can we somehow use that money towards else, or how can increase or improve the physical progress of the project. Physical progress performance should be measured based on fully or partial accomplishment of the milestones until the forecasted end date. The idea being that it is either we hit the milestone or we not hit the milestone. Like in some cases, partial makes sense. If you were supposed to finish 3 tasks for mobilization and you've got 2 out of 3 done, that it makes sense. But if the milestone is to build something, then it has to be either it's built or it's not built. If project tracking score drops less than 50% for 2 consecutive quarters, reallocation of budget may be considered for other prioritized projects. So last 2 bullets here is why we're doing this. The idea is if the projects are not being executed as they were planned, then we need to start looking at when can we do something, or when we can get involved to either get them back on track or maybe reprioritize the portfolio to see if the money can be spent or resources can be spent better on some other projects. So one of the suggestions here, then again, these are suggestions. Every company will have their own definitions. The idea is that if the score drops 50% or lower for 2 consecutive quarters, a reallocation of budget should be happened for the similar kind of projects. So if it's a betterment project, we'll take the money and look at what other projects were there, which are either decelerated or deferred, and then you can start thinking, can we do them now? Because this project is probably going to get deferred. The other one is if project tracking score drops less than 20% for any given quarter. So you've really fallen behind within the quarter, then a relocation should occur right away, and see what else can we use that. Obviously, if you don't do this, by the end of the year, you may find out that the money was there and we did not use that money, or that resources was there and we did not use those resources for the right things. And it's quite a problem in organization, in our experience, where it does happen, where you'll see when you see the tracking, you have that classical hockey stick graph, where things are not being spent, and in the end you try to spend all that money on different things, but that's not the best use of that money. So the idea is, if you have a proper tracking stage in the portfolio management, then you'll be ahead of this hockey curve, and you'll be able to actually use those resources in time for the right things. Okay, I do want to talk about the project types here very quickly. So when I'm talking about taking that money for the projects that are not on track or they're falling behind, the idea is not to take that money and assign to any projects. You will go back to these kind of categories, like betterment projects should have had a betterment budget that you assign in the. Sorry, is there a question? Can you lead him up?
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea was that in the prioritization stage, you assign some money to each of these type of projects as a budget. So betterment should have its own portfolio, and when we decelerate a project in betterment category, you're using that money to prioritize another betterment project. It's not like we're taking it from betterment and giving it to some other. Not to say it cannot happen, but if you've done it this way, then obviously that money was allocated for that category for strategic need, and it should stay that. And if you are doing the portfolio management properly, all this work is already done in advance. So you don't have to worry about it. Okay, moving on to the validation stage. So this is now the projects have completed, and we're trying to validate the returns or validate the promises the project made. Each department and area should identify projects that need to be validated for the return each year. Some projects may only be validated after a few years based on business case. So the idea is you probably won't be able to validate every single project because usually you don't have the time and resources to do that. So you should be selecting based on what you saw, right? The promise it made, the business case it was bringing, the risk it had attached, and maybe in the tracking you saw it was doing something that you need to keep an eye on. Then you pick that project, right? Those are the projects you're going to validate. The multi-year idea is that if you remember in our very first webinar, we had talked about some of the projects might be giving you returns on multiple years. Then in that case, you want to be able to evaluate every year, right? And see, did it bring the gap closer, or close the gap as it was identified in the business case. And then ideas to confirm if the project delivered what it promised. Maybe it's financial NPVs, rate of returns, paybacks, cost reductions, and did it reduce the risk that the project was trying to do? Utilize hypothesis testing to ensure return claims are valid. It's really a approach that we have also used in past, is to say when a project says I did close the gap or I did improve the NPV, you want to do some kind of hypothesis test to say, is the return or the claim valid, or is it significant enough? Project returns should be compared to Monte Carlo estimates from the project definition stage to build intelligence on organization's ability to build business cases. So what is this? Is in project definition stage, we had talked about that all the indicators, the leading indicators, lagging indicators, the financials, all should be in not single point estimates, but at least in 3-point estimates or some kind of a Monte Carlo distribution, which helps us define that a business case, what is the probability of that business case delivering. So now you're in a stage at the end where you actually got a return out of that project. So it's no longer what it can deliver, it has what it has delivered. So you now can compare that return back to your planning stage and say, how good were we at planning, right? And then this helps us build that maturity in that process. If project deliverables are not met, even though the project work was on track. So the idea is that in tracking stage, everything went smoothly. We spent the money, we met the physical milestones, but it did not deliver what we thought it was going to deliver in the business case. So at that point, what we should be doing is trying to understand why. So what were the root causes? What happened, right? So you can utilize Lean Six Sigma tools such as critical to quality, 5 Whys, Fishbones. There's a lot of different tools which we can pull to do that kind of root cause analysis. Usually, you would be doing that in the project stage itself, because you'll be monitoring the leading lagging KPIs of the business case going through, but it should be done at some point in the validation stage. Any lessons learned, good or bad? must be documented and shared across the organization. Very good opportunity. If you've done this process, portfolio management process, the way we walk through, everybody has now standardized way of thinking, and everybody is pulling towards the integrated value chain. So it's great to share. It's a project delivered on something, so that's a good thing. If we learn something why it didn't deliver, it's good to share, so people can learn and apply in the next cycles of this. Validation should lead into the next year portfolio process, specifically in strategy definition validation stage. If you remember this slide I had in my very first webinar on this topic, in the strategy stage, you are doing this where you're trying to identify the KPIs for each strategic driver, and you're listing the projects which will close the gap where you are, where you're going. So now is the time to do the full circle and come back and see how much of the gap it actually closed, right? So this was done in the planning stage, and now you're redoing this and saying, okay, I my project B has finished. Did it deliver 7? Okay, what's left? Project A delivered 8. So next year, I expect project A to deliver 5 and 2. I still have a gap of 3, and so forth, right? So are we on track? Or we need to now identify other projects because it didn't deliver what it was supposed to deliver? You're trying to redo and close the loop, come the full circle. In summary, really the portfolio management is about how well we define the business case, how well we prioritize, how well we make sure the best resources are assigned to the priority projects, and then how well we track and validate the returns. What you're trying to do is stop people from committing resources to low value initiatives, and get best returns from the limited resources that everybody has. Obviously, companies don't have unlimited resources usually. Okay, my last slide here. Just like my other ones for the portfolio management, the focus of this tool, this approach, is to make sure that the right process is there. It's not about identifying or defining the best project. It's about making sure the overall process is there, so you are getting the best projects defined and prioritized and then implemented. Typical improvement journey for this kind of work will start with understanding where the process is and where the gaps are, so we can work on those, not on defining the individual projects or getting better projects defined. Okay, the last piece, I always try to stress this, if A&I is involved in any kind of things that we do, we make sure that the focus is on building the system components, as well as making sure sustainability is there of the people who we're working with. So development and coaching is part of it. I'll open it now to the questions, if anybody has any questions. And also, I'm going to launch these polls. I have 2 questions today. One about the journal one that we have, and then the second one is really about, now that you've seen through all 6 stages, which one of these for the best value added for your organization. Okay. Go ahead and actually, if there's any questions, let me know. I will go and see if there's anything posted. Carmen, does it take a long time to conduct this overlap? Yeah, good question, Carmen. It depends on what stage we usually get involved in, but if you're trying to implement the whole system, I think the definition and designing it doesn't take that long. It's about implementing and coaching the guys to make sure that people are doing the things correctly. Initial implementation may take a few months, but then the overall value will come from the multiple cycles of using this process. So you have to do it and stick to it. Okay, anybody else? Thanks, Luni. Okay. I mean, if nobody else has any, thanks, guys. If nobody else has any questions, I'll give you a couple of minutes back. Thanks again for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.